if we go on a little further,
I want you to tell a little bit of your testimony too.
You want about Mary and Martha, or to drop that?
I want you to give some of your testimony too.
Pardon?
I want you to give them some of your own.
You want me to stop and do that now? All right.
Then if you do that quick, you go back to Mary and Martha.
I was born in England, and when I was 18, I went to Canada and became a worker. I worked as a chore boy for a senator at first, and during that winter he left us, as senators all spent their summer in Ottawa, in the capital. They were farmers only 6 months of summer. In 6 months of winter they were parliamentarians, they were senators. And so he left me and the other worker on the farm to work together. And when he came back, he never paid me anything. When he came back, and I went for my money, he said, well, you were not worth anything for some months, and I'll give you $15 a month for the rest. And I was so furious I couldn't even talk to him. But I had been, I'd been helping a man who had come up with 1,000 sheep from the States at that time, and he said when he came up, I would be among the first workers he would take on. So as soon as he came up, I joined him, and he was better. He said, I'll give you double what the senator gave you. They used to call the senator Skinflint Bostock. But I went on to this other farm, and he, instead of giving me what he said he would give, he gave me even more than he bargained for. He gave me $40 a month. Sounds terrible now, but in those days it sounded something. Anyway, I was herding 1,000 sheep at that time for 10 hours a day. It was a 10-hour working day in those days. And then I went, a friend of mine came along, and we went hunting for a time, and I did all kinds of jobs. I got a job on a farm, running a farm for a man. He and his wife just went off and left me running this farm. We had about 7 or 8 purebred Guernsey cows. I had to milk them twice a day, and then we had a big team of horses. And I ploughed and did all the farming work, and at the same time cooked for myself, and I found it quite a good life. And I was paid a bit more, of course, for that. And for a year I ran this farm for him, and then I got a job on another farm, and where I was just one of the workers, and that was just milking cows by machine and all that kind of thing, and clearing land with teams of horses. Then I worked on the waterfront for a time as a longshoreman. There were 2 kinds of bags of wheat in those days. One was 100 pounds, another was 250. And you had to carry these 250 bags up steps and dump them in the hold of the ship. Of course, you couldn't do that more than about 1 hour, but somehow I got away with it. And I did a lot of different jobs of that kind, working on the railroad gangs and so on. But I also I was driving a tractor on a prairie for a time, about 12 hours a day. And then I went on a thrashing gang on the prairies of Alberta. And it was there that something happened. Even before that, I'd felt that life was not what it was meant to be. And I felt that I was a desperate sinner. And I said, I'll get rid of these sins by a confession. So I went to Vancouver, and I met an American priest, and he heard my confession. I'd confessed before that, but this was the first time that it had a dynamic change. When I stood up, I knew I was a free man, as I'd never been before, and my life was something different, and the sort of miracles began to happen. When I was on this thrashing gang in Alberta, I was living at the top of the farmhouse, and one night I never slept at all. It was as if a voice was speaking, although there was no audible voice. It was something like this: that you are trying to get rich quickly, and I'm trying to find workers. You won't get rich in the same kind of way, but it'll be a much better way. And anyway, I closed with the offer and wrote to various people the next day, saying that I would be giving my life to God, and I wouldn't be farming anymore. And my father wrote saying, come home and let's have a look at you. And so one of the things I noticed after this was that when the horses didn't do what I wanted them to do, a terrible language came out. And I said to God, if anybody's going to believe that I'm working for you, you'll have to do something with changing my tongue. And I noticed this went on for some time, but a bit later, I was playing football and my leg went out sideways and I collapsed on the ground and people gathered round me, but only one word came out, and that was not a swear word, it was just God, and I was so amazed I was smiling. And people said, isn't it painful? And I said, it is very painful, but I couldn't tell them why. I was smiling. From that time onwards I never had any trouble with my tongue. And in that way. And when I was in India, my first year in India, I got malaria about 3 times. And when I had been sent away to a place, and I got into the train, and I was returning, I could feel this terrible malaria on me again. In those days, malaria was a very bad. It shook you, your whole being, and your temperature became very high, and it dropped very low quickly, and you felt you were dying. I remember holding the hand of a big Australian, and he felt he was dying. Many people did actually die with it in those days. And the only treatment was quinine and hospitalization. But I was hospitalized 3 times, and I got sick of it. And when on the way back, I determined that I was going to get rid of it. So I didn't go back to my place. I went to a couple who I knew, and I knocked at the door and said, can you give me a bed and water? And they said, we'll give you everything. But I said, I don't want it. I want just a bed and water. I want to fast this thing, pray and fast until I get rid of this. So of course they gave it me, and I began. That was a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Sometimes when I thought they were not there, I would shout at the top of my voice because the pain was unbearable. But when I got to a Thursday, I felt that something was happening, and on Friday I knew the thing was beaten. And they came to me and said, this couple, they said, shall we cancel your preaching engagement on Sunday? I said, don't cancel anything. And on Saturday I was up, and on Sunday I kept the engagement. I was very weak still, but the great thing about this is that I never got malaria again. I also knew that I could be bitten all over by mosquitoes and I would never get it. Somehow I was completely immune to it, and I have been ever since. So when you get healed by Jesus Christ, it's something different from the ordinary hospitalization. And when I was in India the second time, I lived for 20 years there without illness, and it was then that I became aware that I needed the power of the Holy Spirit, and I never knew about it before. So for many years, from about 1950 until 67, I was studying everything I could, and even going to meet people and talking to them about the power of the Holy Spirit and how to be baptized in the Spirit and so on. I think I knew by head knowledge about everything there was to know, and yet I couldn't receive it myself. It was 1967, one morning, in the upper room of a house. I was praying with 2 people. We all 3 were standing together. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we were praying together, and I was baptized in the Holy Spirit and spoke in a language I never learned. And from that time onwards, I had a new power. I was able to go preaching everywhere, wherever people invited me and so on. I didn't have the same difficulties I had before. Before, I always had to have things written and all that kind of thing, and notes. But since then, I do prepare when I can, but when I'm not able to, I remember what St. Jerome said, that a servant of the Word should never be at a loss for words. Maybe I've had enough of my. It's the time is up, I think, isn't it? I'll just go to Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha?
No, Jerusalem.
You wanted something in Jerusalem?
Right. Living there.
Pardon?
About living there.
Living in Jerusalem?
Go ahead.
Yeah, when I entered Orthodoxy, when I was, I saw the tremendous divisions in India, and so I went to a monastery and prayed for about 3 months to try and find out the true traditions. And I came to the conclusion that Orthodoxy was the true, although I didn't know how the Orthodox were living, I did believe that theoretically anyway, Orthodoxy was the true tradition. And as I had been asked to write to a Russian bishop for some reason or other, it occurred to me to write to him myself, and so I asked him what to do. And he said, don't be in a hurry, go and live with the nearest Russian priest. So I went down to Kerala, the extreme south of India, and I found him living on a little mountain in a jungle. The only water was a spring halfway up where the frogs lived and kept it clean. And we had to carry the water up on our backs. And we grew our food, which was rice, on the top of this little mountain. And we had no money practically. We never were eating the things you use, such as bread or milk or sugar or tea or coffee. And we just lived on rice and boiled in water one day, and the next day a root called kappa, which is tapioca, I think, but not what you call tapioca. And it was just a long root. We boiled it in water and sometimes dipped it in what this priest called a sauce, which was which was coconut oil. Coconut is the oil of South India, and it's used for cooking and burning. And we use it, of course, for everything, for our lamps as well as for the sauce as well. The sauce and little salt and some tiny little green chilies and tiny little onions which grow in the tropics. Big onions won't grow. And this was we dipped it into this, and the food was so unappetizing. And not only did we only have one meal a day, but when we invited the local Indians to come, they couldn't eat it. The poorest of the poor couldn't eat it. And I said when I went with him, I'm not going to tell anybody that I have any need, but if anybody says or provides the money, why then I would say that's the sign that I have to leave this place, because the bishop hadn't given me any indication of what I should do. And so at the end of 9 months, somebody wrote to me and said, I left some money in a bank in Bombay. It's at your disposal. So I took this as his sign for me to leave. And so I left and traveled up to Bombay and then to Jerusalem and tried to enter the Greek church. But the Greek patriarch wouldn't receive me. And so there's no need to stop there, I think, and give the reasons. So we went on. Went on to Yugoslavia. I tried the patriarch of Yugoslavia. His name was Barnabas, and he sent me to a priest called Father Nicholas Velimirovich, who was a famous missionary priest of Yugoslavia. And he knew English very well. He'd been trained in a university in England part of his time. And he was supposed to test me. So he tested me for some time, and then he said he found me quite orthodox. But the Yugoslav said, we have received everything from 2 directions, from Russia and from England, and we wouldn't want to displease them. So why don't you go to the Russians? Well, that's what the Russians were really waiting for, I think. I went to the Russians, and immediately everything was done for me. There was a Metropolitan Antony at the time in the north of Yugoslavia, and he ordered that I should be sent to a monastery which was a Serbian and Russian monastery. And there I became a monk and a deacon and a priest in a very short time. And I was sent immediately. Of course, I was a deacon because I was absolutely useless. I had no Greek and I had no Slavonic. And so I was sent immediately to the Russian mission in Jerusalem. And it was snowing, I remember, at the time. Anyway, I became a member of that mission for 14 years, from 1934 till 48. And during that time, part of the time I was teaching in a school, an Orthodox girls' school for Arab girls and some others, Russians and other people. I was responsible for English grammar and the explanation of the Gospels. Well, that was quite useful. But since then, I've often met some of these students, and one of them, for instance, brought me from India to America by sending a free ticket to me. That was some time ago, about 1969. And I've met others since then too. And then in 1948, the British left Palestine and the British army was withdrawn, and on that very day, we didn't know anything about it, but they were not supposed to tell anybody except women, I think. Only English women were allowed to know that they were leaving. And that what happened was that the war began immediately, and our mission was in the center of it. And so the Israeli army marched into our building, which was a tremendous, it had walls about as thick as this, built by the Russians for the pilgrims who came in hundreds before. Of course, didn't come during our time because of the Bolshevik Revolution. But all our people became house prisoners. I wasn't there. I was in Ein Karim, about 3 miles away. I was the priest of a convent with about 100 nuns. We had about 3 months longer before the Israeli army came, and then we escaped to Bethlehem and then to Jericho and into Jordan. Most of the nuns actually, they were too old and they stayed there. They were pink anyway. They were quite happy to be under the Moscow. At that time, the Jews were allies with the Russians, and they handed all of our property over to the Russians, who gave it to the Moscow Patriarchate, who didn't use it at all, just sent a person to take over the property. They even now don't use it, I think. But I lost everything, things that I could never replace, of course, like translations and books and so on. Anyway, this was how God was sending us out into the world. I felt that we were being emptied out of our nest and being sent all over the world. I went into Jordan for a time, and then I was told to move to America, and from America I was sent to... On the 19th day I got a letter from unknown Greek people, about 9 people, signed a letter saying, come and help us with Bible cells in Athens, and which have already started. You only have to sort of help with them. So I felt that was the call of God. It was the only open door that I had. And I'd met a man who was a young man who was a professor at that time. He was doing research in Hadassah, a hospital I think it was, in Palestine. And he said, wherever you are, as soon as you have to move, only wire me and I'll come and help you. Well, I remembered that, and I wired him. He was in England by this time, and he immediately flew out to me, and he was absolutely invaluable. I could never have moved my books and stuff without him. And we traveled by bus, as I said, overland, after sending the books by ship, which was very difficult. We had to go to Bombay and ship the books. There were hardly any ships. Nowadays, ships hardly exist. And then he traveled with me. He wouldn't take anything for any of his costs. He said it was so tremendously worthwhile, I would do it again. And now he's gone back to England. Anyway, I was 2 years then in Greece. And then an invitation came to go to Australia, to a place in Sydney, and to help with a group of young people, of about 90 young people. But the Greek bishop arranged for me to go and bless my going, but when I got there, the priest wouldn't allow me to operate. There's no need to go into that story. And anyway, in the end, I find myself now in the Antiochian church. Now, I left the Russian church, which I'd been for 40 years a priest in, and now I'm in the Antiochian church because they give me freedom. I'm able to go wherever I wish. And well, that's the story in brief.